Hello, I'm Ben and you're watching The PhD Parent. So it's widely recommended that mums exclusively breastfeed their child for the first 6 months of their life. For more on this issue, you can check out my video in the link below. However, globally, only about 4 in 10 or 40% of infants are exclusively breastfed for this duration. Negative beliefs about breastfeeding, such as women should not be allowed to breastfeed in public, is thought to be one of the major reasons why mums stop breastfeeding earlier than 6 months. It's argued that because of the benefits of breastfeeding, improving breastfeeding rates and supporting mums who breastfeed should be a collective responsibility, with this involving promotion of greater acceptance of breastfeeding in public, which seems fair enough to me. So in this video, I'm going to review research that's investigated beliefs about breastfeeding in public. So this will involve looking at the level of acceptance of breastfeeding in public, the potential reasons why people are not accepting of such breastfeeding, and what mums think about breastfeeding in public. So onto the acceptance of breastfeeding in public, and 3 points before beginning. First, the research in this area has involved some small qualitative studies and other large-scale survey studies. I'll stick to describing the latter, as these provide a more representative snapshot of population beliefs. Second, most studies were published around the mid-2010s, so they're getting a little old, and because beliefs may have changed, for better or worse, it should be borne in mind that their findings may not accurately reflect where people's beliefs currently are. Third, across studies, there have been slightly different ways of asking people about whether mums should be allowed to breastfeed in public. For example, sometimes the question has been, should mums have the right to breastfeed in public? And other times the question has been whether it's acceptable for mums to breastfeed in public. While there's a difference between these questions, they're similar enough to be treated as if they're asking the same thing. So I'm going to start with studies in the US. So the US Center for Disease Control, or CDC, is involved in a survey, the Summer Style Survey. And in this survey, US residents' beliefs about breastfeeding are regularly assessed. The items in the survey differ each time it's run, but two relevant survey items are: 1, I'm comfortable when mothers breastfeed their babies near me in a public place, and 2, I believe women should have the right to breastfeed in public places. In recent years, about 60% of people reported being comfortable with mums breastfeeding in public near them, which is about 10% higher than in previous years. And about 70% reported believing that their mum should have the right to breastfeed in public, which again is about 10% higher than in previous years. Next, in an online study of about 1,000 people in the US in 2013, Roche delivered a more detailed survey in which people were required to indicate whether they would be comfortable seeing a woman breastfeeding across a variety of public places. And here's what they found. So as you can see, while most people are comfortable with mums breastfeeding in public, a sizable percentage are not, though it does depend upon location. Now moving on to Canada. Russell and Ali surveyed about 1,300 people living in Ontario, Canada. About 80% of people said that it was acceptable for a mum to breastfeed in a restaurant, and about 80% said that it was acceptable for a mum to breastfeed in a shopping mall. In the discussion section of this paper, the authors cited 3 other studies that also looked at Canadian residents' beliefs about breastfeeding in a restaurant and a mall. These other studies were conducted in the Waterloo, Halton and Durham regions in Canada and found that whether a restaurant or a mall, about 65%, 80% and 70% respectively of people said that it's acceptable for a mum to breastfeed in these public places. So now over to Europe. So Scott surveyed about 400 mothers across Scotland, Sweden, Spain and Italy. Participants were asked whether they agreed or disagreed with the statement, women should not breastfeed in public places such as restaurants. The researchers found that about 90% of Scottish and Swedish mums disagreed with this statement, indicating quite positive beliefs about public breastfeeding. However, only about 60% of Spanish mums and 45% of Italian mums disagreed, suggesting considerably less positive beliefs about public breastfeeding. Finally, down in the Southern Hemisphere, Huang analysed data from about 20,000 participants who'd completed a nationwide study of New Zealanders in 2016-17. Participants were asked whether they agreed or disagreed with the statement, women should avoid breastfeeding in public. About 75% of participants said they disagreed, suggesting that folks in New Zealand generally have fairly positive beliefs about mums breastfeeding in public. And last but not least, Meng reported the results of 5 surveys conducted between 1995 and 2009 in Western Australia. About 5,500 participants were asked whether they thought it was acceptable for mums to breastfeed in a range of public places. There was relatively little change across years, so I'll just show you the most recent results, which were as follows. So in summary, it looks like people are generally accepting of mums breastfeeding babies in public, though the level of support appears to depend upon the country and the specific location in which breastfeeding occurs. And in terms of increasing rates of exclusive breastfeeding through greater acceptance, the majority of people who support mums breastfeeding in public is generally not overwhelming, so there's clearly room for improvement. So now onto what drives disapproval of breastfeeding in public. Now this is not an issue that appears to have been extensively investigated. From what I can tell, one approach has been opportunistic, involving researchers conducting analyses of demographic data they happen to have on hand to see whether demographic factors might drive differences in beliefs about breastfeeding in public. These demographic factors have included sex, age, and education. In terms of sex, women have been found to be less supportive of breastfeeding in public than men, but not always. In terms of age, older folks have been found to be less supportive of breastfeeding in public, but again, not always. In terms of education, folks with lower levels of education tend to be less supportive of breastfeeding in public, and this finding has generally been consistent. Some researchers, however, have tried to more explicitly investigate this issue. So Morris evaluated the comment sections of news websites and parenting forums that related to an incident reported in the British press in which a woman who was breastfeeding in public at Claridge's, a luxury hotel in London, was asked to cover up. In total, 805 comments were analysed. The researchers extracted several themes, with 2 common themes against breastfeeding in public being observers' embarrassment, not knowing where to look, and disgust at this natural bodily function. Basically, commenters expressing negative beliefs were arguing that women should be discreet if breastfeeding in public. In a later study, Morris took a different approach, developing a questionnaire to assess what may drive non-acceptance of breastfeeding in public. Long story short, while several factors may be involved, the 2 factors most strongly related were the belief that breastfeeding in public is inconsiderate and the belief that this bodily function is disgusting. Thus, these findings provide converging support to those of the previous study. Now, while this research provides some initial indications of what may drive negative beliefs about breastfeeding, this area of research appears to be in its early days, and more research is clearly needed if we're going to have a better understanding of the origins of such negative beliefs. Now, to finish up, I'll look at research that's examined what mums think about breastfeeding in public. So HUAC reviewed research focusing on mums' experiences of breastfeeding in public. Thus, the most straightforward thing to do is provide a summary of their review. These researchers considered 27 papers, which were mostly qualitative designs. Most of the papers involved participants living in Australia, the US, or the UK. The review revolved around 2 themes: mums' beliefs about what increased their willingness to breastfeed in public, and mums' beliefs about the challenges faced when breastfeeding in public. The findings related to each of these themes are considered in turn in the following. And I'll supplement this information with the findings of HUAC in 2020, who conducted an online survey that was completed by about 13,500 women across Australia, Ireland, and Sweden. So first of all, beliefs that increase willingness to breastfeed in public. Many mums report initially being uncertain about whether to breastfeed in public and lacking the confidence to do so. Mums suggested that breastfeeding around other people soon after birth, particularly when others were supportive of breastfeeding, for example a spouse, family member, support group led by a nurse, built their confidence to breastfeed in public. Put differently, believing that others are supportive of breastfeeding may increase the likelihood of a mum breastfeeding in public. Other mums report that getting positive reactions from people while breastfeeding in public outweighed any negative reactions they encountered, and so made them more willing to breastfeed in public. And finally, some mums believed that it was important to just ignore the opinions and comments of others and get on with breastfeeding in public. Now onto beliefs about the challenges faced when breastfeeding in public. So here, HUAC identified 4 themes: breastfeeding drawing unwanted attention, breast being sexualized, being aware that others may be uncomfortable seeing a baby being breastfed, and having to be discreet. I'll expand upon each of these in the following. So first, in almost every paper, mums commented that a major challenge of breastfeeding in public is that it can draw unwanted attention from others. Around 30 to 40% of mums said that this was an issue they had to deal with. The type of unwanted attention mums encountered included unsolicited opinions from others, being judged or labelled by others, being subject to stares, odd looks or disapproving gazes, usually from men, or being confronted by someone. Mums said that this attention resulted in them feeling self-conscious, uncomfortable, embarrassed, and/or anxious. Second, another common challenge experience related to the sexualization of breasts. Many mums acknowledge that breasts are typically seen as a sexual part of the body and express the belief that potential exposure of the breast while feeding may be considered inappropriate. This issue was found to be particularly evident amongst mums under the age of 26 years. Third, being aware that others may be uncomfortable with seeing a baby being breastfed was another common challenge, with about 10 to 20% of mums reporting that they experienced this issue. Mums said that they didn't want others to be uncomfortable around them or that they were aware of the negative feelings of others. Sometimes mums said that their awareness of the discomfort of others came as a result of direct comments, or else it was assumed based upon others' reactions. Now, this issue could be pervasive, with some mums having to negotiate it within the broader family context as well as when out in general public. Finally, the challenge of being discreet when breastfeeding in public was also frequently raised. Many mums believe that there was an expectation that they should hide themselves while breastfeeding, either by covering their breasts, going to a more private space, for example, car or parenting room, or using a bottle. For some mums, the effort to hide breastfeeding their baby led to feelings of isolation, and in some cases, mums not going out in public as much. In terms of what mums said they would do when having to breastfeed in front of someone they were uncomfortable with, about 40 to 60% said they would try to be discreet, for example by using a muslin cloth, scarf or jacket to cover up. About 20 to 30% of mums said that they would go somewhere private, and about 10 to 20% of mums said that they would turn away. Now my own view is that breastfeeding in public is perfectly acceptable, and that it's somewhat ridiculous that mums have to deal with these sorts of challenges. But that's an issue for another video. For the moment though, that's it for beliefs about breastfeeding in public. If there's anything I've gotten wrong, any important research I've overlooked, or if you have any questions, then feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, happy parenting.